Welcome to AP Psychology. We are in the first lesson of the first unit, so right here at the very beginning. And today we're going to be talking about the historical contributions to psychological thinking. So basically the timeline of how we got to where we are today in psychology. Today we're going to talk about two main lesson objectives. The first lesson objective is we're going to discuss the psychological and physiological perspectives that shape how we think in psychology. And then we're going to discuss major historical figures in psychology and identify their their contribution. So for that first learning objective, we're going to look at the perspectives in psychology. So we have 5 main perspectives. We're going to go through an overview, then we're going to do a quick dig in to each perspective, and then we'll move on to the second learning objective. So the first perspective is the biological perspective. Basically, these perspectives are lenses through which you can see basically behavior or humanity. The biological perspective says that all thoughts, feelings, and behaviors ultimately have a biological cause. So my thoughts, my feelings, and all of my behaviors have to do with something that's going on with my body. The psychodynamic perspective says that behavior is determined by the unconscious mind and childhood experiences. So the things that I'm doing are determined by what's going on in my subconscious, not my conscious mind, and what happened to me in childhood. The behavioral perspective discusses how environmental stimuli affect observable behavior. So we see behavior, but we really are looking at what is going on in the environment that is causing this person to act in this way. The cognitive perspective is more involved with the thought processes, the mental processes that are going on. So the key to human behavior is contained in their mental processes. So cognitive psychologists believe that we can look at the thought patterns and the mental processes to figure out what is going on with the human behavior. And then finally we have the humanistic approach. According to the humanistic perspective in psychology, each person is unique and individual and has the free will and the ability to change. So the other perspectives tend to either be more scientific or they take some of the power away from the human in their own behavior. So the humanistic approach kind of gives a lot of that power back, empowering people, but also it gives them that responsibility that your behavior is your fault. So, all right, let's keep moving on. We're going to dive a little deeper now. So in that biological perspective, the central ideas here are the brain, hormones, DNA, and neurotransmitters are responsible for most of our behavior. Most behavior traits are inherited. So genetics has a lot to do with why we do the things we do. Also, according to the biological perspective, when a person has a mental disorder, it's because there's a misfire or some kind of glitch in the brain. As such, medications can be used to correct improper behavior by correcting the body. So the biological perspective believes that you doing something irrational or, having some kind of behavior has to do with something in the body, and if we can correct the body, we can correct the behavior. The psychodynamic perspective, the central ideas there, are that humans have little free will when it comes to their behaviors, because remember, it's subconscious and part of their childhood experiences. Also with the psychodynamic perspective, we have these 3 little creatures, let's call them, the id, the ego, and the superego. A quick way to remember this, and we will get into more detail about this later, is think of the id as the devil on the shoulder, the superego as the angel on the shoulder, and the ego as the brain of the cartoon character that is having to decide between the angel and the devil. The 3 main methods of assessing the unconscious mind, because remember, that's what we're really looking for in the psychodynamic perspective. So we have free association, dream analysis, and slips of the tongue, which we also call Freudian slips, which we'll connect in a minute. Those 3 things we will get into a little later when we dive a little deeper into the psychodynamic perspective. The therapy method in the psychodynamic perspective is known as psychoanalysis. It's that classic, you're sitting on a couch, spilling your guts to the psychologist who is taking notes and evaluating you. Psychoanalysis attempts to help patients resolve their inner conflicts. So basically, you'll tell them what's going on, but they're going to help you resolve what's going on inside. That's less obvious. Now let's move on to the behavioral perspective. The central ideas here. There are 2 main processes in behaviorism: classical and operant conditioning. in classical conditioning, this is what we call learning by association. Basically, think of it this way. You know that when the bell rings at school, class is dismissed. So that is classical conditioning. You know that the bell, which technically is not associated with classes at all, has something to do with it because you've been trained. Okay, operant conditioning is the other type of conditioning. This is learning from the consequences of behavior. This is when you break a rule and you get punished, or you do something wonderful and you get a reward. You learn, hey, I need to do more of the wonderful things. In addition, we have what's called positive and negative reinforcement and punishment. So here I want you to change your thinking a little bit. Positive and negative does not mean good and bad. It means adding and taking away. So it's more like math. So in a positive environment, you're adding something to the situation. Negative, you're taking something away from the situation. For reinforcement, this is anything you do to the behavior that makes the behavior continue. Okay? Punishment is anything you do to the behavior that makes the behavior discontinue. And we will go much deeper into that when we get a little further in. The cognitive perspective, again, we're looking at the mental processes and the mind. So the central ideas here, we need to understand what cognition is. Cognition is simply the mental act or process by which knowledge is acquired. So this is the learning process, essentially. The three main things in cognitive perspective is that you're dealing with memory, perception, and attention. We will get into those more a little later. You also need to know what the information processing model is. So basically within the cognitive perspective, we see the brain as some type of human computer. Basically an input produces a process in the brain which produces an output that we see as behavior. So it's a very scientific approach. And then we get to the therapy method, which is known as cognitive behavioral therapy, which basically the essential premise of this is if I can change my thought patterns, if I can change the input, I can change the process that goes on in the brain, and therefore I can change the action that happens. So it's changing your thought patterns so that we can change the action. Then we get the humanistic perspective. And remember, this one is all about free will and people can change, and we put the kind of the humanity and the power back in the hands of the human. The central ideas here is that behavior is connected to a person's inner feelings and self-image. We are responsible for our own happiness and well-being. So yes, while it is empowering humans, it is also giving them all the responsibility for their behavior. That your behavior is you. It's up to you. We as humans have a desire to self-actualize or realize our full potential. Basically, that we have a desire for purpose and meaning and intentionality. And it deals with the more subjective side of humanity. So it's not looking at it so scientifically as cognitive perspective. Here's the biggest thing I want you guys to learn about these perspectives. An accurate study of psychology is derived from a combination of the perspectives, not just one, not even just two. Like, look at multiples of them. Each perspective contributes value to the study of psychology. Each perspective is unique. Each perspective focuses in on a different part of humanity, and they each contribute something different. So look at a situation from all the perspectives and evaluate it from that. All right, I want you to pause here and fill in the notes. Make sure that you understand the central ideas of each perspective in psychology. There are 5. Just remember those. All right, now moving on to our second learning objective. We're going to discuss the major historical figures in psychology and identify their contributions. Mary Whiton Calkin, she's our first one. She is the first female president of the American Psychological Association. She established one of the first psychological laboratories at Wellesley College. She developed a system of scientific self-psychology, so a system of self-evaluation, self-assessment. And she believed that the foundational unit for study of the self should be the conscious self, so not the subconscious. Then we get to Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin is known as the grandfather of evolutionary psychology. He claimed that we could study animals to learn more about human psychology, which in a lot of cases has actually proven to be true. Evolutionary psychology states that the brain evolved to solve problems for our literal survival as a race, as a species. We adapted to our surroundings over time. It's basically that survival of the fittest idea. Dorothea Dix, she will come up in history classes as well. She was instrumental in the founding and expansion of more than 30 mental hospitals. She changed the national conversation around mental illness from these are shells of humans to they're actually people, and you can actually fix the issues. She challenged the idea that people with mental disturbances could not be cured or helped. A lot of times, families that ended up with someone with a mental disorder would just ship them off to a mental asylum and leave them there. She was also an activist for humane treatment of those with mental disabilities. So she is the reason that a mental hospital looks a lot less like a prison and a lot more like a rehab center now. Then we get to Sigmund Freud, and if you spend any time in the world of psychology, you will hear this name a lot, so pay attention. He is the founding father of psychoanalysis, so back at that psychodynamic perspective, that psychoanalysis treatment method. He developed the idea that the key to human behavior lies in the unconscious mind, and he created methods of therapy to unlock the subconscious. He's also the founder of the psychosexual perspective of psychology. This perspective claims that children are born with sexual urges, fulfilled at different life stages by different objects and different body parts. So it's a strange perspective, this psychosexual perspective, and a lot of it has been disproven. We still talk about it because it really was the foundational perspective for what led to the rest of what we're going to talk about this year. All right, then we get to G. Stanley Hall. He is the founder of child psychology and educational psychology, so he is fairly important in the teacher world. He earned the first PhD in psychology granted in the United States ever, and he wrote many of the questionnaires that we still use in child psychology. William James is the father of American psychology. Keep that in mind because there's another one later. He wrote a book called The Principles of Psychology. Some of his students included Mary Whitton Calkins and G. Stanley Hall, so he was their teacher. And he contributed the idea of functionalism to psychological theory. The idea that we should look at the whole situation, the whole person, and the whole environment to understand the human, the individual. We come to Ivan Pavlov. He discovered and studied classical conditioning. So remember, the bell rings, class dismissed. For him, it was he rang a bell and the dog associated that with dinner time. He became the father of behaviorism. He won the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine in 1904. Jean Piaget, he was the founder of the theory of cognitive development, so the one who created the idea that the mental processes are the key to behavior. He was influential in the development of developmental psychology. Now, developmental psychology deals really with the lifespan and how the human develops over time. He was also a pioneer of the constructivist theory, which argues that people create their own idea of the world based on their ideas and experiences. So basically the idea that humans have a lens that they look through. Carl Rogers was a humanistic psychologist. His main argument was that for a human to reach his or her full potential, a number of factors had to be present. Things like genuineness, acceptance, and empathy. He identified the 5 characteristics of the fully functioning person. They had to be open to experiences. They had to experience existential living. Existential living has to do with believing that there is something bigger than you and that you're a part of something bigger. To trust feelings, so not just to have feelings of trust towards others, but to trust your emotions, to trust that they're not lying to you all the time. Now sometimes they are, and you have to have that discretion, but to be able to trust your emotional process. They also have creativity, so they have a wide-eyed wonder at the world and a desire for their brains to continue to grow and expand and be creative. And then they live a fulfilled life, so they feel like they have purpose and intention and meaning, and that life gives that to them. B.F. Skinner, he developed the idea of operant conditioning, so that other type of conditioning. He looked at the causes and the consequences of an action. He is also the one who created the ideas of positive and negative reinforcement and punishment. Margaret Floy Washburn, she was the first woman to earn a doctoral degree in psychology in the United States. She was the American Psychological Association president in 1921. She wrote a book called The Animal Mind and developed a motor theory of consciousness. It's very interesting if you want to look deeper into it. We're not going to get super deep into that theory here. We have John B. Watson, who was a pioneering psychologist in behaviorism. He believed that psychology should be primarily scientific and looking at observable behavior. He conducted an experiment that we now know as the Little Albert experiment, where he basically conditioned a little boy to be afraid of a white rat by playing a scary song or scary music every time the white rat would come near him. The problem is, he never deconditioned Albert to be afraid of the white rat, and so he essentially, we criticize the ethics of this experiment now because he essentially traumatized a little boy about something rather harmless. And he never de-traumatized him, if that makes sense, if you can even do that. Okay, and then last one, Wilhelm Wundt. He is the father of psychology, period. He opened the first laboratory dedicated to psychology ever. He also separated philosophy from psychology by analyzing the mind in a more structured way. So he was, basically he separated psychology by making it more of a science, less of a speculation or a I wonder like philosophy is. Okay, I want you to stop the video here, fill in the notes, make sure you understand each of the 13 major contributors to psychology and their contributions. They will be on the quiz. We will also do an activity with them. All right, in this lesson, you learned about the major perspectives that shape psychological thought and that you need all of them. You really need all of them to get a full picture. And then the second learning objective today was the major historical figures in psychology and their contributions. And we did go through them a little quickly, but feel free to pause the video, stop, rewind it, watch it as many times as you need to. You have access to this. So, what's next? Tomorrow in class, I need you to come to class prepared with your flipped notes and your quiz taken. So there's a 5-question quiz, comprehension quiz after this that you need to find and take. Tomorrow when you come to class, we will do 2 activities. We'll do the psychological perspectives application activity, and then we'll do major historical figures flashcards. So you'll make a set of flashcards for those, and you will add to those throughout the course of the year, so keep those handy, okay? Keep them in a little box somewhere. Tomorrow evening you will have no homework, yay. The day after that, though, you will come to class and do topic quiz 1.1, so be prepared for that. All right, here is a fun meme for you guys to take with you and enjoy. Until then, I will see you in class tomorrow. Bye.